Okay, so we are going to have a little look at pre-industrial Britain. So pre-industrial Britain, obviously for us, is before the Industrial Revolution. I'd be thinking any time pre-1800, okay? So we're going to go through gloats. To start off with, I have given you an A3 sheet of paper, and I've said to have a little look at some, or list down some of the examples of activities that you could participate in pre-industrial Britain. So I've put some images on the side here. Have a little look at whether you can identify them really quickly for me. Okay, so image 1 at the top here is showing us real tennis. Image 2, bare knuckle boxing. You can see our upper class patron at the side here. And image 3 is mob football. I've got a summary sheet for you where I'm looking at 4 case study sports. I think I've done football, tennis, rugby and boxing, going through all of the time periods that we study. If you can understand them sports, that will provide you with loads of examples for pre and post-industrial Britain. The only other sport I would use as a good example is either pedestrianism or cricket, whichever one you feel most comfortable with, and we'll talk about some of these examples as we go through the next couple of slides. Okay, so some key terms for us about that we will use not just in pre-industrial Britain but in post-industrial Britain as well. Social factors to start with. So social factors is anything kind of that affects lifestyle or attitudes, or in our particular example, social factors is anything that was going on in society that is going to influence the sports and pastimes that were pursued. So we obviously studied gloats for our social factors, so how gender affected opportunities in sport, religion, literacy, law and order, what have we got, transport, wealth, any of them. Codification is establishing rules or laws, so we look at the setting of rules and national governing bodies in sport. Broken time payments were introduced to pay working class performers if they were absent from work in order to compete or if they were injured. Broken time payments is an important one for us because it led to the split between the two codes. It led to the split between the two classes in rugby, leading to the formation of our second code, which is rugby league. Amateur or amateurism. Amateur or amateurism is to play for the love. So amateurs were upper class gentlemen, and as we go into post-industrial Britain, we talk about the middle class as well. They thought that the sport was the reward in itself, and amateurs were not paid to compete. So amateurs were your upper and upper middle classes. Your professionals down here. So I've got a compare question. Whereas my professionals were the lower classes, amateurs were not paid to compete. Professionals were paid to compete. Amateurs competed for the love. They thought the sport was the reward in itself, whereas professionals competed for money as a source of income. And we look at how some sports, how the amateurs introduced exclusion clauses, how they introduced their own teams and leagues, how major events such as the Olympics was amateur only. We look at the phrase muscular Christianity, the belief that manliness was next to godliness, that God made you big and strong and you would honour him with your sport and ability. The notion of muscular Christianity was introduced into the public schools by Dr. Thomas Arnold, and they wanted to make a strong Christian gentleman. Okay. The early closing movement. The early closing movement then was a series of bills passed through Parliament, which led to the reduction in working hours, particularly for shop workers. Now we've seen the factory workers had the Saturday half day. Okay, they obviously presented regular times for leisure and, in which case, sports involvement, whether that be participation or as a spectator. Pre-industrial Britain, before the Industrial Revolution, pre-1800s. Athleticism. Well, we've looked at the definition of athleticism a number of times. Athleticism is a combination of moral integrity, doing the right thing, and physical endeavour, physically trying hard. So you could demonstrate moral integrity by doing things like walking in cricket. You could demonstrate physical endeavour by training or playing when injured, continuing to train or compete, to compete and work to the best of your ability even when you're losing. And the Our Clowns V is on there because Our Clowns V was the mnemonic I used to describe the features or characteristics of pre-industrial sports and pastimes. So the O, well, in fact, you just pop me on pause now and have a little go at that. Do you know what Our Clowns V stands for? So it's the characteristics of pre-industrial activities. Okay, so just pop me on pause, have a little go at that, and then we'll talk through it together. Okay, so your O, occasional, your U, unwritten rules, the R, that they were rural, your C, that they range from courtly to popular, your R, what did I have for my R? O, U, R, occasional, unwritten, rural, courtly and popular. Oh, I'll have to come back to my own R. O, occupational, W, wagering, N, non-local, V, violent. My other R. Oh gosh, I hope you can get it. I'm not sure. I can't remember my own R at the minute. All right, but that was just a little clue to give you some of the characteristics of pre-industrial activities. So pre-industrial activities then, if we're going to go down gloat. So start with G, gender. So women, key thing, remember I said to you, throw the answer in the examiner's face straight away. So women had less opportunities than men. They had fewer rights, they were perceived to be the weaker sex. However, in pre-industrial Britain, females did still participate, but it depended upon your class what activities you would pursue. So the upper class women would do elitist, skilled pastimes, sophisticated activities such as hawking and archery. So they had the time to develop the skillfulness. They were in particularly physical pursuits, so women were enabled or allowed to participate in them. Lower class women, however, participated in physical activities, less uncouth sports and activities such as smock racing, where we know the lower class women were selected and the prize was a dress. Literacy and education, and I told you literacy always links to rules and codification. Now the upper class were literate, remember they were educated in the public schools. Because they were literate and could read and write, they had written rules in a large number of their sports. So whenever you see a sport pursued by the upper class, you will typically see that it had rules and codification, such as real tennis, we know the rules were written in French. Cricket, which we know had incredibly early rule structure, with the formation of the White Conduit Club and the MCC in pre-industrial Britain. And then lower class sports, in comparison, were unwritten because there was widespread illiteracy and they were uneducated. So their sports had lots of variations, no national governing bodies, and as a result, no leagues and cups and activities set up like that. They were all locally coded and locally significant. Good examples are mob football. And if you can, provide some different variations that you know of mob football. Everyone's always really good at telling us about Ashbourne mob football, but can you talk about other variations such as Haxie Hood, hailing the silver ball, all of the activities in mob football. I mean, although rules varied, obviously, depends on your local area, the aim of the game was the same. It was a large group of lower class men pursuing a force-based activity where there was lots of violence, where you would be getting an object from one area of the town or village to another. Okay, and these sports were often cruel and violent and reflected their lifestyles. Okay, little law and order then. There was limited law and order in society. If there's limited law and order in society and sport reflects society, then there will be limited law and order in sport. So we see that lower class sports were incredibly violent in their nature, and you know this. Your sport and examples are always in history, and the sociocultural studies is your evidence. So what is the evidence that you've got to support your claims? So you know, for example, that mob football had rules such as no murder. You know that injuries were common. You know that there was lots of crowd violence in athletics because of the wagering. You know that they pursued activities such as bare knuckle boxing. The baiting sports were widely pursued. So that reflected their society. I told you public hangings were a form of entertainment. If public hangings are a form of entertainment, they are not going to see baiting sports and bare knuckle boxing as barbaric. We know obviously that changed as Britain underwent the civilising process. And so law and order, and then our next one is availability. And I'm going to start with time. Upper class had free time. If the upper class have got free time, they can pursue sports more regularly, and I told you that they can pursue sports that last a longer length of time. And their sports, therefore, were often very skilled because they had time to develop the skillfulness. Good examples might be things like golf is a really good example. In pre-industrial Britain, I would be thinking about things like hunting might be a good example to use. Lower class sports, however, often didn't last as long. They were pursued occasionally, often on feasts and holy days. Mob football is another good example because it was commonly pursued on Shrove Tuesday. There was lots and lots of free holidays, bank holidays in pre-industrial Britain. There was around 42. And obviously these feast and festival days, wakes and fairs were activities for sports involvement. There was no PS3s and Instagram and video games and even board games to be keeping them widely entertained in them days. So these activities, were incredibly popular. The lower class worked long hours. Don't mistake that for saying that they worked in the factories and they were working the 666, because that's post-industrial Britain. However, they were working, Britain was agricultural, wasn't it? So they were working in the farms, in the mines. So they were working incredibly long hours. This was often seasonal. Okay, so you could be working incredibly long hours during the harvest. However, in the winter, they could be struggling for any work and to pay for food for their families. So, Britain was very difficult in these times. If we're looking at money then, well, we know the upper class in pre-industrial Britain, the same as today, have greater wealth and income, and therefore their sports were often involving specialist equipment, specialist facilities. Real tennis is a good one because there was a purpose-built court. The upper class often built things at home as well to avoid having to travel, whereas the lower class sports were very, very simple, with very limited equipment, very limited facilities. Again, mob football is a great one because you know that they were using the pig's bladder for a ball, that there were no goals, there were no boundaries. Even cricket, there was no boundaries. And they were using kind of really basic, a club-shaped bat and 2 stumps. So, very limited equipment. And then the transport. Well, it was very limited transport. The upper class, you can see in this image here, they had a horse and carriage, not to be taken with a horse and cart. Upper class would not have been taken around in a horse and cart. So the upper class had horse and carriage, so they could travel to activities. So upper class sports could be regional and national. However, the lower class did not have access to travel. They would walk, so they pursued local activities. And they couldn't set up teams and leagues, therefore. However, transport, did on occasion become the basis of some sports. So walking led to pedestrianism, and we know there was famous race walkers like Captain Robert Barclay, who famously walked 1,000 miles in 1,000 hours for 1,000 guineas. Riding, which was obviously the most common form of transport in them days. Well, it's the easiest form of transport, fastest. Led to the introduction of things like horse racing. You could even have things like ferrymen became the first rowers. So transport could be linked to the development of some sports. And then social class. Britain was a 2-class society. You know that was called the feudal system. It consisted of the uppers and the lowers. Now, we did obviously end up with a middle class in post-industrial Britain. That comes from the merchants and traders in pre-industrial Britain. So the people who, maybe owned mines, who became early bankers, who made a lot of money, who then capitalised in post-industrial Britain in working and owning and running the factories. But in pre-industrial Britain, it's just upper class who played sophisticated, skilled sports with complex rules, with specialist kit and equipment, in comparison to the lower classes who played violent, simple sports. You did see a question on class as we were going throughout the course, which was quite a difficult one, and it links to class to the choice of sports in pre-industrial Britain. If I got a question like that, I would always introduce it by saying, okay, so upper class pursued sports that were skilled, sophisticated, lower class, violent, simple, occasional. And then you want to talk about sometimes they played the same sport and had the same role. Now I want you to have a little look at some of these. Sometimes they played the same sport but had a different role. Sometimes they just pursued different sports. Just again, pop me on pause, because the best form of revision is not rewriting things and rereading things again and again and again. Remember, revision is just about testing yourself. Do a know it, finding the things we don't know so that we can then fix them. We have no problems in making mistakes before the exam, all right? It's about identifying where we were going to make mistakes so that we can avoid them on the day. So put me on pause and see whether you can provide me an example for each of them. A sport where they both pursued it and had the same role, where they both pursued it but had different roles, and 2 examples of sports that they upper class and lower class would have pursued separately, or different sports that they would have pursued, sorry, to word that better. Okay. Right, well hopefully you've had a chance to pop me on pause and have a look at that, so I'll go through some of the answers now. Same sport, same role. A good example of that is betting sports, because what were they doing? Well, they were both watching and wagering. Same sport, different role. Good examples of that would include things like cricket. Both classes pursued cricket, however, the upper class would hire the lower class often as gardeners and gamekeepers based upon their cricketing talents, and the lower class would pursue roles like outfielders, where you'd have your upper classes, your batters. Pedestrianism is another really good one. Pedestrianism obviously comes from the upper class, racing their messengers and eventually hiring them based on their kind of talents, and then eventually the lower class become the pedestrian or the race walker, and the upper class would be the patron or sponsor. So that's another good one. You could use boxing in the same way. And examples of where they pursued different sports, great examples there for you are real tennis and mob football. Okay, amateurs and professionalism then. We have already discussed this when we did our key terms, but your gentlemen amateurs were your upper class, your professionals were your lower class. Sometimes the upper class would compete, the amateurs would compete against the professionals, but only ever to test themselves. So early athletics is a good example there. In a major occupation, the gentry employed footmen and waged on them. The lower class competed as pedestrians and earned a good living. So Captain Robin Barclay was the example we discussed before. Okay, so that's a really quick catch up on pre-industrial Britain.